right. I will now open up the Estacada City Council Workshop, Airport Amendments Briefing and Discussion, and I will hand that over to Taylor.
That's right. Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to do the PDF thing. Here we go. Full screen. Okay. So we are talking about the airport related amendments that the council has talked about a few times now. This is the second briefing that we've done with you all, talking through the proposed potential amendments to our comp plan policies and development code, basically to help protect the airport from being redeveloped into something other than an airport in the future, and also to satisfy state requirements. So let's get into it here. Just a little reminder on the background leading up to these amendments. In 2022, we had a land use application that I'll go into a slightly more detail in a moment, but basically it revealed that, oops, we have these unmet state requirements, and it put us in a legally precarious position in trying to process that application. And then in February of this year, we discussed what we want to do about that. Obviously, we want to remedy this legal vulnerability, and ideally do so in a way that promotes the council's priorities around the airport, which it sounded like the primary interest there is keeping the airport as this local asset that's beneficial for a number of reasons, and making sure that it's able to remain an airport in the event that it gets sold or development pressures come along. So in following that was at the joint meeting with the Planning Commission, I believe, in February. Following that, we've worked with some state agencies and some local stakeholders, and also you all, the council, to develop some of these recommended solutions. And at the same time, we've been working on updating the transportation system plan. And so we're hoping that the timing will work out, and that the hopefully there won't be too many changes to these amendments, that we'll be able to actually adopt the airport amendments and the TSP at the same time. So objectives for this briefing: staff is I'm gonna summarize the proposed amendments and hopefully answer whatever questions you all have. If there's anything I can't answer or that Alan can't answer, who's also online, we at least want to gather the questions from you, and then we'll be able to get back to you with those answers. And then we're hoping that you, the council, will just give us your feedback. What do you think about it? What concerns you about it? What changes do you want to see, so that we can make those changes and bring it back to you with those updates for adoption. So to reorient ourselves, this is a clip from the comprehensive plan map showing where the Valley View Airport is. And it's actually, you can kind of see the lines showing the different properties. This is showing not only the airport property itself, but also some of the surrounding properties that are included in the airport designation that's in blue on our comp plan map. Slightly different shape. This is the county's map that draws the boundary around the established Valley View Airport territory. And so that is established in that Clackamas County document. So technically, for the county's purposes, for the county's regulatory purposes, they've established this territory as, the bounds within which their airport overlay zone applies, and their airport plan policies apply within this boundary. Okay, so back to those unmet state requirements that I mentioned. The section of the Oregon Administrative Rule is 660-013, which basically establishes that any city or county that has planning authority over an airport has to adopt policies and land use regulations for that airport. And so planning authority is kind of the tricky word here, because this is why I think it went unmet, basically, is because the county currently, the airport is not annexed into city limits. And so it's under county jurisdiction, but it is within our urban growth boundary. And so that means that we have planning authority because everything within our urban growth boundary, we're supposed to plan for in our comprehensive plan, map. So we were supposed to adopt these policies and land use regulations for the airport. And we did a little bit of that, but we missed the mark. So that's what we're trying to do here. So yeah, that was the second note down there. On our comprehensive plan map, we do have an airport designation, which means that whenever a property comes into city limits, that zoning designation is what we intend to apply as the zoning for that property. However, we never adopted an airport zone to go along with the airport designation that's on the comp plan map. So if the airport property asked to annex into city limits right now, we wouldn't have any airport zoning to apply to it with what uses are allowed in that zone and what are the development standards that go, that regulate the development in that zone. We don't have that. And if we have a comp plan designation for a zone, we need to have a zone that corresponds to it. Similarly, we don't have a chapter or like a subchapter in our comprehensive plan that focuses on the airport and what policies we have around development of the airport and future uses of the airport. And that's the other piece of the state requirement that we were supposed to have met. So the land use application that I noted before that kind of highlighted this issue was 2022-01 annex. It was an annexation request for this property that's right next to the airport. It is a separate property from the airport, but it was designated. It still had the airport designation on the comp plan map, which we think was just sort of a vestigial, unintentional mistake whenever that property was partitioned off back in the day. And so they wanted to come in and rezone to low density residential. We thought, okay, well, that makes sense because they aren't part of the airport. They're not, there are no intentions for the airport to expand out that way. And B, it's more convenient for us to have them rezone because we don't have any airport zoning that they could have applied to their property anyway. So we thought, okay, great, that works. And went ahead processing that application. And when we process those applications, we have to notice different agencies. And so one of the agencies we have to notice is DLCD, basically the state's planning office. And DLCD, I think, was the agency that punted it over to the Oregon Department of Aviation because it kind of flagged, oh, this is right next to an airport. We need to make sure that the Department of Aviation is aware of it. And ODA came back and said, oh, wait, you're not allowed to do that. You don't have any, you haven't met this OAR requirement. You're not allowed to approve this request. Well, I think I'm getting on to the next one here. Yeah. So ODA was saying we couldn't legally approve this request for annexation and rezoning because we haven't satisfied that OAR rule. Whereas at the same time, land use law also states that if we're going to deny an application, we need to point to the criteria that aren't met, that we're basing that denial on. So we were in a really tricky spot because we didn't have those zoning criteria adopted that we could have based a denial on. And we also weren't able to approve it according to ODA because we hadn't met this state requirement. We ended up approving it, and they didn't appeal it, but it was precarious.
They don't have any enforcement authority.
Right.
So we had I had a conversation with them on the phone. And we talked about the various rights and also the 120-day clock, which is for the applicant. And so at the end of the day, they didn't have, at that point, they didn't have any model rules they could point to or anything else that they outside of because a lot of this is the federal aviation has a lot of the standards as far as like runaway setbacks and all those things. So we were in a really unique position, I think, based on a mapping error is kind of the conclusion we finally came down to, because the airport itself was all planned development. And so the lots that were supposed to be part of that airport, it was all developed at once. And for whatever reason, somebody put a color on a map, and the next thing we knew, we had issues with the state. So.
Yeah, and I think another reason they, as we were negotiating all of this with them or talking through all of it with them, we let them know, they sort of just took our word for it, ODA and DLCD, that we were, adding it to our work plan. We're going to get these policies adopted and this code updated. So it was nice that didn't turn into more of an issue for us, but it could have. And so, yeah, that's part of the reason why we're here is let's meet this legal requirement. The other reason being that the city or you all have talked amongst yourselves and with the Planning Commission about wanting to prioritize the protection of the airport. And we can talk more about that if you feel you need to today. But with that guidance of wanting to make sure that the airport, if it ever gets sold, doesn't, or, if the current airport closes, could another one open up there? That is what these draft amendments are intended to accomplish, is to protect that land from being redeveloped into residential or some other type of development that would basically prevent an airport from existing there anymore. So what you have in your packet is what I'm going to pull up on the screen here, and it includes three main components. You have the comprehensive plan amendments, which I also refer to as the policy amendments. These are overarching policies that this is where you, the council, kind of capture your overall intentions for what you want to see get accomplished, or what you want to see get developed, what you want to protect as things develop. And then the code serves to implement those intentions by regulating what people are allowed to put where, how things have to get built, if they get built, stuff like that. Gets more into the nitty gritty. And so the code sections, there are two different types of code sections, which are the underlying kind of main zone that we'll also call the base zone, and then also the airport overlay, which extends a little bit beyond, it extends into 3D space and a little bit, outward beyond the boundaries of the zone on the map, because it's got, if you think about airplanes coming in, they come in at an angle. And so you're thinking about height restrictions, and there are calculations for the ratio of these, what you call imaginary surfaces that need to be calculated in order to prevent someone from building a structure that's too tall and would become a hazard for planes and stuff like that. So let's get into the draft amendments here. This is really small on the screen, but this is what went out to you all maybe almost a month ago. And so I'm just gonna kind of walk through the basics of these, and I should be able to zoom in on any of this if you want to read into the specifics, but otherwise I'll just summarize what these amendments include. So this first part, This first part is the comprehensive plan amendments. So these are the policy amendments that I was talking about. Most of the policy updates that we're proposing would be part of the transportation chapter of our plan. And that's what we are currently working on updating with our transportation system plan. Since the airport is kind of, you can think of it as part of the broader transportation system, we figured it makes sense to adopt these together. But there's a couple of other chapters that include references to the airport that we figured needed updating too. So on this page, you see the start of chapter 6, which is environmental quality and land use hazards. And this includes considerations around noise and related to the airport. The only real change to this one is actually not the total removal of a policy, but just relocating a policy to the transportation chapter. So I don't know if you all want to dig into that more, but I won't dig into it unless you tell me you want to. Chapter 10, we tried to show this in a way that would make sense because the transportation system plan is basically going to get adopted by reference into this chapter. So everything that you see here, even if some of the existing goals and objectives are going to basically remain with the adoption of the TSP, they won't show up as text here here on this page. This page will just reference the TSP, which is a really large document, as you guys all know. So I hope the red strikeout doesn't confuse you there. So what we're proposing to do is split chapter 10 into 2 sections and have the TSP comprise section 1. So section 1 will adopt by reference the TSP, and then section 2 will be the airport plan section. So section 2 will be everything about the airport, and that's where we're showing in green here all of this text that we're proposing to add about the airport. So the first part of this section.
More of a comment. Your guys' layout of this and the presentation was so helpful. Having, I don't know, cliff notes or spark notes, whatever you call it down there. It just hit a lot of the questions that I had going in and provide the explanation. So even the TSP airport plan, section 1 and 2 is great. TSP addresses land-based travel and airport plan, airport related issues. That was very helpful. I just wanted to comment on that and say thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. That's good feedback. Glad to hear it. Yeah, so for the section 2 airport related part of chapter 10, it's normal in the comprehensive plan to start out with with a little bit of background, just like existing conditions or, background information. So we wanted to provide some of that there. We also wanted to give some explanation about what imaginary surfaces are. And so we gave a little bit of explanation there. The calculations for imaginary surfaces are really complicated, and we probably would need to have our city engineer or someone draw those up for us if we can't find them in other documents. But there are standard calculations for those that basically if new development was going to come in, they would need to have their engineers, draw up those imaginary surfaces based on the calculations and demonstrate how their development is not going to impose or encroach into those 3D services in space. Yeah, if you've got any questions about the background information there, let me know. Otherwise, we'll look at the policies. Also, I don't mean to dismiss make it sound like it's unimportant, but the real strength, the real impactful part of your comprehensive plan are the policies, because those are the things that whenever you're making certain types of land use decisions, like a zone change or a conditional use, the applicant has to demonstrate how their proposal meets the comprehensive plan policies, or at least doesn't conflict with it. So the policies are really the part of the comp plan that that have, legal teeth, basically, that you all will be basing your decisions off of. And so the background information is helpful, but the policies are really the thing you want to make sure you get right. Okay, so we have the background section there. We also just wanted to note, the interagency context, and so how the city and state agencies are coordinating, or supposed to coordinate around regulating airports. And we can, if there's any concern about that section, we can amend it, but it was, as I think Alan noted here, borrowed almost word for word from Clackamas County's current airport plan. So that's where all that came from. And then the objective section, you can think of the objective as sort of the overall guiding intention of the chapter or the section of your comp plan. And so the objective that we think the council is wanting us to pursue with these amendments is ensure the continued safe and effective operation of the Valley View Airport while minimizing or mitigating any adverse impacts on surrounding residents or property owners. I think that sounds like a great objective. If there's anything that you would want to add to that, we can add to it. You can have multiple objectives that you're working towards with your policies. So feel free to suggest something different if that doesn't feel complete or quite right to you. And then the list of policies here. So as I noted, the policies will become a legal basis for future land use decisions. So it is important to capture, to get them right. And basically, these policies came out of our understanding of what the council is concerned about, and then our coordination with a variety of different agencies, stakeholders, looking at what other jurisdictions have in their policy documents. And so this is kind of cobbled together from all of those sources of input. And it might be helpful, since I want to get these ones right. So I am going to go down and read through them. I'm sorry to read off the screen, but it's important. So the first one is implement policies and actions that allow for Valley View Airport to continue to operate in its current location into perpetuity. And the into perpetuity, I feel like Elena had a comment that maybe the wording could be a little different on that, but the intention with that one is to, make sure that we're establishing this intention for that area to remain an airport, an airport that is a publicly available asset for the city into the future. 2 is regulate uses at and around the airport consistent with state and federal regulations applicable to public use airports. So that's basically capturing the intention to comply with state and federal laws related to airports. Number 3, coordinate with the county regarding land use issues and processes associated with Valley View Airport. Yep, that one's pretty.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so whenever we have from my perspective, for my department, whenever we have a land use related proposal, so whether it's in a private development proposal that an applicant is requesting from the city, or whenever the city is proposing changes to our code or proposing a zone change, we would notify the county as soon as we have that proposal, ready to bring through the process, notify the county and say, hey, this is what the city is intending to do or considering doing. Does the county have any comments? And
Would that be after it was annexed into the city? Because before then it would just be a annexing that we would communicate with them. Is that?
yeah, if it was an annexation, we would notify them that we were intending or considering annexing the property. If it was if these amendments are ready to move forward, then we're going to start preparing the draft for adoption hearings. That's something that impacts land that the county also regulates. And so we will notify the county, hey, this is what we're intending to do with these amendments related to the airport. If it's private development on the airport and it's not yet annexed into city limits, I think the county would be doing permitting through Clackamas County. So we would only find out about it if Clackamas County notified us that they had this development happening. That would be odd because I think that it's the county's policy. I don't think that you're allowed to divide land if you're inside of an urban growth boundary, but you're not annexed into the city's limits. I don't think the county lets you divide land, but they might let you do small partitions depending on the size of the property.
My concern was just if a property owner annexes into the city, the way that's written, it sounds like at our discretion, we could communicate with the county about it. Like say somebody annexed a residential parcel into the R1 part of the airport and then they wanted to build a house. Is this language, the way it's written, forcing another layer of permitting headache for the homeowner?
No.
Okay.
No, noticing the county for the annexation is standard procedure already.
Yeah.
So this one I started to kind of breeze by this one because this one actually just sort of reiterates a process that we're already doing anyway for land use proposals specifically. For building, like if someone was just going to build a structure and it was just a building permit, we don't have to notice the county at all unless they're maybe improving the county right away, but the applicant would go directly. So,
And there are also some instances where they might not be able to get, and this isn't for this instance, but where they may not be able to get city water, if they're out of the city or something like that. So whether they're annexed into the city or out, they might be covered with different special districts, or they might be covered by the sheriff versus us contracting with the sheriff. And then the other reason it happens is the assessor then assesses them the city property tax. So the annexation itself has, besides being part of the city and getting city services, it has some other collateral impacts so that we need to be on the same page. And it used to be that if they were in the county and they weren't, whether they were in our urban growth boundary or not, you went with the jurisdiction that you were in. So they would have done everything in the county. But then they changed it without getting too far into the weeds. The cities now have something called a urban growth management area, which is the area that is in our UGB, but outside of the city. And so the state wants enhanced coordination on all that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hope that's helpful, but if there's more questions about that, totally happy to answer more. The fourth one is cooperate with the DEQ and Department of Aviation and the Federal Aviation Administration to minimize conflicts between airports and uses of surrounding lands. And so what we've done with that policy is taking I don't know, Alan could speak to this. I don't recall if we asked for comments from DEQ yet, but we've he coordinated very closely with a representative from ODA. And then ODA is sort of our more local connection to FAA. You know, the guidelines that we get from ODA are, you know, give us the minimum requirements of FAA and more, right? So, yeah, I don't know if cooperate is exactly the right verb that we want there, but it works. Coordinate or align, something like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that we have not reached out to DEQ yet. We've just reached out to ODA. And I think probably the next step, once we get closer to the language that we expect to be adopting with this, then I can reach out to DEQ for their feedback on what we have.
Okay.
Are there any non-conforming uses in the airport area as it is now? Like when we're coming up with a new plan, is there anything that's gonna be a non-conforming use?
We will get to
Oh.
that. Like it depends on what the council decides for the list of allowed uses. So, next is support the use of Valley View. Oh, I just want to make a comment question maybe on number 4. I don't know how much it makes sense to include DEQ in that list. I don't know why it would be harmful to, but yeah, just a note.
So this is kind of, I mean, they want the language in, but it's more for something like the Aurora Airport, which is actually on septic, not sanitary sewer, and backs up to the Puddin River. And so if you're going to do development on that, it definitely can have potentially have an impact. So a lot of airports, including like Portland International, got built on rivers. And so that's kind of I think it's probably, they take less of an interest in this. It's more of an interest in runoff that they have.
So
Does
not,
it complicate things leaving it in there? Or would it simplify it if it were taken out?
They just won't have any comments. Like, they're not required to comment. It's to give them the opportunity to comment if they want, and they have a specific time period to comment or not. And so I wouldn't expect that we would actually get any comments from DEQ. It's more demonstrating to DLCD and the ODA that we're essentially giving them close to the mark language that they've helped develop.
yeah, that makes sense to me.
Just want to call out a little time check here, because we're halfway through our time.
Okay, I'll speed it up. Support the use of Valley View Airport as an identified emergency response and disaster recovery facility. Encourage the establishment of wetland mitigation banks in the vicinity of airports, but outside of the approach surfaces in order to mitigate hazards for air navigation. Restrict building and development within designated airport protection zones, blah, blah, blah. Ensure that land uses around the airport are compatible with airport operations while considering community needs. And ensure that land uses around Valley View Airport don't preclude future airport expansions or commercial air service.
So, and I'd submitted a question on that one, just have we, is that a realistic thing for our airport here? I guess we could start there.
Yeah, I don't know. Because the runway runs north and south. From what I understand, I think that some of the surrounding properties would need to be purchased and developed if they were going to expand the airport in any way, because the existing runway runs north and south, and at the north end of it, it hits, it butts up against Deuce Road. And at the south end of it, you can see a kind of carved out reserved open space area from where The Cascadia Ridge 5 subdivision came in and they had to prohibit development on this lot at the end of the runway because of the runway protection zone. So they couldn't extend the runway because there's homes, on the other side of that. They couldn't extend the runway north because it would hit Deuce Road. So if they were going to add a new runway at a different angle, that would require some of the surrounding properties to, I guess, be bought and redeveloped. So I don't know how they could expand the airport, but if somehow they figured that out, they acquired enough land, would the city support that expansion? Or are there any reasons why the city wouldn't want the airport to expand if they had the land and the means to do so?
Okay, so and at this point, it probably is like that other one. It probably meets the model language as well too.
Right, I think.
They would have to do an underpass under Deuce. I mean, if they wanted to extend it, cars would go underneath. I mean, it would be just hugely expensive. So it's incredibly unlikely.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
Going back to number 5, on the support the use of the Valley View Airport as an identified emergency response. That one in particular sticks out to me. What was our language on that? Because from what I understand from talking to Melanie, is that this is outside of Sun River on one of the larger private owned public use runways. And then obviously with our history with emergency response and stuff like that, does Clackamas County have, like kind of what I was asking you, Melanie, do they have any interest in helping us preserve from that standpoint? Like, let's just say fire services or emergency response stuff. In that case, this is a pretty critical piece. Yeah, we got like Independence has a smaller runway and stuff, but I'd have to run numbers. It's been a while since I've flown. I used to fly, but I know that like Sun River, they can land private jets and different turboprop stuff. What's the designation for emergency use on this?
Yeah, this airport is a privately owned public use utility airport. And so that I think that's determined by the size of the runway. Please chime in, Alan, if you can correct me. But it's on the smaller end. It's like the second to smallest kind of category in the chart that the state has laid out for categorizing airport classifications. And so I know that because it's a public use utility airport, its current classification designates it as an emergency response publicly usable airport, but I don't think that it can accept larger aircrafts, like even small jets. I think it's just like prop engines and helicopters, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but has there been any consideration to that? We looked at that as far as management objective on, fires are not a stranger to this community, nor surrounding area, clear to Detroit and stuff.
So they had gotten a grant a number of years ago, and I think for paving, and part of what they had done in return was that it can be used for conflagration, whether that is to evacuate people. It's a large enough site so that they could evacuate, depending on where the fire is, potentially use it for evacuation purposes and things of that nature. But it's not a long runway. It is the second. There's a private use airport designation in Oregon as well, which is smaller. But this is the second smallest designation. This in Sun River, though, what's unique is that most airports are public use or private use. So it's like a landowner with a runway. And so it's just unusual to have open to the public with some restrictions, like they can restrict gliders or things of that nature, but it's rare to have privately owned public airport.
Were you asking whether the county and the city would partner on owning and operating the airport, or was that, am I?
I don't think it would need owned operated. It doesn't have a tower or anything. We'd have to just maintenance. But I'm just wondering, like, when we're talking about the designations here, especially like with the emergency response, like, is there consideration when we're talking about rezoning or what we're talking about allowing? Has any of that, like, is any of this code for what happens, I guess, with that if you do allow development?
Yeah, so that's where, yes, so where this policy would come in the event that someone came in and said, hey, I want to rezone the airport property, or I want to rezone even this this property that's right next to the airport, but I want to rezone it to something that's like a high intensity commercial use, something crazy like that. That would be in direct conflict with, right? Anything that would prevent the airport from being used as an emergency response disaster recovery facility would be in conflict with this policy. So whenever those land use decisions would come up, we'd be able to point to this policy and say, that doesn't match with these intentions that we've codified in our comp plan.
What this really prevents is if somebody bought it and wanted to redevelop the runway for housing or whatever it is, like if you guys adopt this language, you're essentially making it almost impossible for it to get rezoned and redeveloped, because we're putting such a high value on continuing it as part of our, specifically as part of our TSB and as a protected asset. So I know that some of the people that kind of own houses on the airport were really worried that a developer might buy the parcels that aren't owned and convert them to some other use. And this would be an incredibly high barrier that someone would need to get over. I mean, I guess anything's theoretically possible, but it would be really hard for them to come up with findings that would allow them to rezone that.
Okay, thank you. That's more directly what I was.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, I'm going to move along to the code stuff and try to be quick here. I don't think we need to talk about that. All right, so the development code amendments, these are all in Title 16 of the Estacada Municipal Code. And these are both the base zone and the overlay zone that I'm going to breeze through. I don't think we need to look at the definitions, but I'll take questions if you guys have definitions on those.
Base zones R1 overlays the airport zone.
The base zone will be a whole brand new zone. Yeah, but like R1 is an example of a base zone, right? Just a standard zone. And then the overlay will lay on top of that and includes, goes a little bit beyond the boundaries and goes into 3-day space. So we added some language to a couple of the residential zones just to reiterate the fact that the overlay will trump whatever the height restrictions in those underlying zones are. So I don't think we need to go too much into those, except just to note, we only added those in the 3 residential zones that we thought were likely to be applied around the airport. Currently, the only zone around the airport is the R1 low density residential zone. But we thought, okay, in the future, someone might request a higher density zoning and the council might approve it, but we think it would probably just be maybe R2, maybe North City residential. So those are the only zones that we recommended that change in, but theoretically you could take all of our zones and add this note into it, just clarifying the airport overlay height restrictions are what apply around the airport. We don't think it's necessary to add those into any of the other zones. So, and then, so the new zone chapter that we're proposing for the base zone is 16.42 airport. And basically this, the zone is created to establish what is allowed in that area. So first you have your list of uses permitted outright. And these are mostly just regular airport related activities. I won't go down and read every single one, but correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, I think this list was once again kind of cobbled together from looking at what other jurisdictions allow for this type of small airport.
Yes,
so you-
that's right. That's right. And we got a little bit of feedback from counselors too, just questioning some things. And I think after those conversations, we made a few changes as well.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. And so the only non-airport or, flight related uses that we have proposed here are at the end, which are limited agricultural uses and limited dwellings. So these are ones where, we welcome your comments on any of them, but we kind of want to draw your attention to those two, just to find out, do you agree that it would make sense to allow existing agricultural or forestry activities that were pre-existing at the date of adopting this ordinance, and to expressly allow legally existing dwellings on or before the date of this ordinance, including their expansion, replacement, and including the only type of new dwelling that we would propose allowing would be an accessory dwelling unit. So, there are a bunch of homes, residential lots right around the airport. And so some of those do fall within the current airport, what would become the airport zone. And so do you want to allow those existing homes to, if they wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit, like a mother-in-law suite, right? Would that be acceptable to you all? We thought that makes sense. We probably wouldn't want to allow too much new residential development right near the airport, but maybe accessory units would be okay.
Does it allow for undeveloped lots to be built out? Sounds like it's
nope,
shutting that
it-
down.
it doesn't. And so the zone would need to be changed to, R1 or something that allows residential development. And so I'm imagining that either the zoning map, the comp plan map stays how it is, or some of those properties that are currently designated airport, but they're residential properties that are just next to the airport. They look like on our map, they're in the airport designation, but it would be perfectly fine for those to be rezoned I think it'd be fine to rezone those to a residential designation. And then what the overlay does is it says, okay, you're allowed to do all these residential uses, but you have to meet these overlay development restrictions to protect both the people in the residential lot and just avoid conflicts between homes and airplanes, basically. So no, in order to protect the airport property make sure it is able to remain an airport, protect the airport uses, we wouldn't recommend allowing new residential development on those lots, except for ADUs. We have,
should notify the property owners of that.
yes, yeah.
But if they didn't annex, then they'd go by what the county's letting them do.
Right.
Is this on?
I only see one on the west side of the runway that's undeveloped, the rest of them, and then there's a couple pieces on the east side.
Mhm.
And who owns those? Do we know? That is it still the airport right now kind of thing? You know what I mean?
So we had a couple of conditional uses that were, these are also sort of question marks, basically like recreational type flights and like parachutes. And then also governmental structure or use of land or public utility substations. So all of these proposed conditional uses would have to go through land use approval with the planning commission. So someone would put in an application requesting to be allowed to do this activity or development, and they would have to demonstrate how their proposal isn't going to conflict with the comp plan policies, so those airport policies, and how it meets whatever code criteria we have in the underlying zone and stuff like that. And then that request would go to the planning commission. They would review it and decide whether to approve or deny based on how well it meets those criteria. So if anyone has comments or preferences on the conditional uses, we think those make sense to have that little extra bit of review for those.
Is there a reason the airport zone is splitting some properties, parcels with different zones?
On our map currently?
Yeah, the comp plan map just shows it kind of cutting through. Right through some parcels.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the history of the shape of the zone on our comp plan map is. That's definitely something, the council, it has the authority to change the zoning designation on the comp plan map. And you probably would prefer to have the property owners agree to the designation, but it's not required. So the council could rezone properties if you find that it's appropriate, makes sense to do so. You can do that. And then just noting on the development standards. So we have two sections of development standards. The first one is for non-residential uses. So if the airport was going to develop a new hangar, for example, we thought it would make the most sense to model those development standards off of the rules that we have for industrial development in the light industrial zone. So that's where most of these requirements are coming from. And they're quite basic. There's nothing wild about those. It's pretty short. But then we also have a separate section for standards specifically for residential uses. So if someone was going to come in and build the only type of new dwelling they could build would be an accessory dwelling unit, or if they were going to expand their home in a way that would bring it closer to the property line, these are the setbacks that would apply. If they were going to add an ADU, would they need to add parking? Actually, I don't think we're allowed to require parking for ADUs. But that's what this section is. And then one last thing here. So if they have a residential, wait, I don't know if this makes sense. So we have a lot size and dimension. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. We wanted to establish a minimum lot size that would be like if someone annexed their property and it's next to the airport property and they want to divide it. We were thinking, what should the minimum lot size be? And how can we basically discourage dense residential development, getting denser residential development right up to the airport. So we are proposing a larger minimum lot size in that zone than we have in any other zone. We're proposing 10,000 square feet, which is not unheard of. It's kind of normal for low density zones in other places. But I'm just noting out loud, it might not make sense for that standard to only apply in the residential uses section. So Alan, let's check back in about that. Because that standard should apply for the whole zone, regardless of what use would be on the lot.
Okay, I'm making note of
Sorry.
this.
Thanks. Sorry if I made that confusing for folks. Okay. Yeah, those are the basics there for the underlying base zone. And then the overlay compatibility zone, there's a lot of text here, but I don't think we need to take too much time going through it. As I mentioned, this is where those imaginary surfaces come in, which are these 3-dimensional distances. They extend outward from the airport, from the runway, based on really specific calculations that are established by the Federal Aviation Administration. And so we have the calculations for those. I wasn't clear on whether the city is going to need to basically hire an engineer to draw those out for our maps, or if that's something that we can require developers to do for us, and then our engineers would check it when they submit development proposals. But regardless, anytime development is going to come in within this overlay zone, they will have to demonstrate that they're not infringing or conflicting with those imaginary surfaces. And that's to prevent conflicts between aircraft and people and other uses. This section also requires noticing. So we have our standard noticing procedures for land use proposals. And this section reiterates that and also adds some requirement to notice other agencies such as the Federal Aviation Administration. I think let me just see if there's anything that specifically I expect questions on. Okay, so I want to summarize just this limitations table because this is maybe what's most complicated. So the overlay zone exists basically on top of the base zone. So right now in that area, we have the airport zone, and then the surrounding properties, we have just R1, the R1 zone. So you either, once we get the airport zone adopted, you can either have whatever uses are allowed in that R1, in that airport zone, or the uses that are allowed in the R1 zone. And then the overlay zone either allows those uses also, or it might limit them in some specific ways. So that's where this table comes in. If someone is coming in with a development application or they're proposing to do a specific use, my department would be triggered to check both the underlying zone and see whether their development's allowed, and also check this overlay zone and see whether or not that type of use or that type of building is limited or prohibited in any way. And that's all explained by this chart, which I don't think we have time to go through the details of, but that is how that will work when someone comes in with an application.
And now that we've walked through this, and if the questions are bubbling up, feel free to reach out. We can put it on another agenda if there's times you all want to discuss it, or we could just get questions answered and then hopefully bring it back so it's ready to go.
Is it okay if the council meeting starts just a couple minutes late in order to collect whatever questions there are? Is that okay for you?
Yeah, that's fine. We'll start on your end. Jonathan, do you have any more questions to add to this?
No, I think I covered it with just my concerns are strictly related to the emergency use. And obviously, I think we should go above board and make sure we notify homeowners or ask for input or whatever
Yes.
regarding any kind of zone change or anything like that. Just give them the courtesy. They bought that property under the assumption that they'd be able to use it how they see fit, right? So I think in maintaining transparency, like that's a way, but I think you guys did a lot of work here. It shows very, very well done.
Yeah. Well, the Cliff's Notes are great and I don't have any questions.
All right, Paul.
They've got all mine already.
All right.
Since I came in late and I'll just kind of go back and review the video, just see what the other council members, but I just want to echo, what Councilor Metcalf presented, that we just continue to be transparent with the homeowners and make sure that we're giving notice, but I'll go back and review the beginning of the meeting. So I'm caught up to speed and I'll just email you if I see anything that catches my eye.
Sounds good.
I've got no questions.
Mike?
I'd like to see the language change to where it allows the undeveloped properties on the airport be able to build the houses. It looks like the one that isn't developed was purchased in 2022. So they just recently bought it for a good chunk of money and they're probably planning on building a house there. I'd hate to see putting something into the code that restricted that.
Okay, yeah, good note. Okay. All right, thank you all. Cool.
Thanks all.
Okay,
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.
at the end for this. All right. I will adjourn the workshop and give you about